December 12, 1940. 11:47 p.m. 22,000 feet above the dark expanse of the North Sea. Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann pressed his gloved hand against the frosted perspex window of the Heinkel He 111, watching the last sliver of moonlight disappear behind a bank of clouds. The temperature inside the bomber had dropped to -15 degrees Celsius, cold enough that his breath crystallized instantly, forming delicate patterns of ice on his oxygen mask. Around him, the steady throb of the Jumo engines filled every space with their mechanical heartbeat, a sound both reassuring and ominous at once. "Navigator, confirm heading." Hoffmann's voice crackled through the intercom, distorted by static and the roar of wind against the fuselage. Feldwebel Ernst Richter hunched over his small table behind the pilot, his pencil dancing across the navigation chart by the dim glow of a red lamp. "Bearing 270, Herr Oberleutnant. 20 minutes to landfall. Sheffield should be visible on our approach from the east." Sheffield. The word hung in the air like a promise. Britain's steel city, the beating heart of English armament production. Factories that stamped out armor plating for their tanks, crucibles that forged the very weapons being used against the Reich. Tonight, Kampfgeschwader 27 would make them pay. Hoffmann was leading a formation of 18 bombers, each loaded with a mixed payload of high-explosive and incendiary bombs. 4,000 pounds of destruction per aircraft. 72,000 pounds total. The briefing that afternoon at their airfield in Lille had been thorough. Major Kesselring himself had addressed the crews, his finger stabbing at reconnaissance photographs spread across the wooden table. "Here," he'd said, tapping a cluster of dark shapes on the grainy images. "The John Brown and Company Steelworks. Here, the River Don Engine Works. These facilities are producing hundreds of tons of steel every week. Every beam, every plate, every shell casing. It all flows from Sheffield. Cut the artery, gentlemen, and we bleed the British war machine dry." Hoffmann adjusted his seat harness and scanned the instrument panel. Airspeed, 180 knots. Altitude holding steady. Fuel, 3/4 remaining. Everything nominal. To his right, Unteroffizier Dieter Vogel gripped the control yoke with the focused intensity of a man who'd flown this route twice before. His jaw was set tight, eyes fixed on the artificial horizon. Behind them, in the cramped belly of the aircraft, the rest of the crew maintained their positions. Radio operator Gefreiter Hans Becker sat surrounded by his equipment, one earphone pressed to his head as he monitored the command frequency. The dorsal gunner, Oberstfreiter Ludwig Schaefer, swiveled his MG-15 machine gun in slow arcs, searching the darkness for British night fighters. Everyone knew the RAF had been getting better at interceptions. 3 bombers from KG-27 had failed to return from the Manchester raid last week. "Coastal defenses ahead," Richter announced. "Anti-aircraft batteries should be active." As if summoned by his words, the first searchlights stabbed upward into the night sky, brilliant white beams that swept back and forth, probing for metal and flesh. Hoffmann felt his pulse quicken. The searchlights were always the beginning. Once they caught you in their cone of light, you became a target for every gun within range. "Formation closing up," Vogel reported, glancing out at the shadowy shapes of other Heinkels moving through the darkness on either side. The English coast materialized below them, a jagged black line where land met sea. Then they were over it, and the searchlights intensified. Dozens of them now, creating a lattice of light that resembled some kind of bizarre spider's web stretched across the earth. The anti-aircraft fire started moments later, orange bursts blossoming in the sky, each one trailing tendrils of smoke and shrapnel. The Heinkel shuddered as a shell exploded 200 meters to port, close enough that Hoffmann could hear the sharp crack even over the engine noise. "Flak heavy but inaccurate," he said, keeping his voice level. "Maintain course and altitude." They pressed inland, leaving the coastal batteries behind. Below them, England lay blacked out, a vast darkness punctuated only by the occasional pinprick of light where some careless citizen had failed to properly cover their windows. The blackout had been in effect for over a year now, transforming Britain's cities into invisible targets. Finding them required precise navigation, careful dead reckoning, and often a good measure of luck. 15 minutes to target, Richter called out. Hoffman leaned forward, straining to see ahead. Soon, they would see it. The glow of Sheffield's industrial fires, the blast furnaces that never stopped burning, the distinctive pattern of streets and factories that matched their reconnaissance photos. Soon, they would begin their bomb run. What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly know, was that at that very moment, 30 miles southwest of Sheffield, a different kind of fire was being lit. 6 months earlier, June 1940, a cramped office in the Air Ministry building on Kingsway, London. Colonel John Fisher Turner stood before a table covered in photographs. Dozens of them, each one showing the same thing. Blackened ruins, collapsed buildings, craters where homes had once stood. The Blitz had only just begun in earnest, but already the devastation was immense. Coventry, Birmingham, Liverpool, Southampton, every industrial center in Britain was burning. Turner was not a typical military officer. At 53, he was older than most colonels, with a background that read more like a theatrical production manager than a soldier. Before the war, he'd worked in film, specializing in special effects and set design. Now, that peculiar expertise had brought him to the attention of Air Vice Marshal Philip Joubert, who sat across from him, smoking a pipe and studying the photographs with grim intensity. "They're destroying us piecemeal," Joubert said quietly. "Every night, more bombers. Every night, more factories gone. If this continues through the winter, our production capacity will be crippled by spring." Turner picked up one of the photographs, an aerial reconnaissance image of Sheffield taken during daylight. The steel furnaces were clearly visible, marked by the surveyor's careful annotations. "The problem," he said slowly, "is that our industrial cities are impossible to hide. The blast furnaces glow like beacons. The Luftwaffe navigators can see them from 50 miles away, even through cloud cover." "Precisely, which is why we need solutions, Turner, not problems." Joubert leaned back in his chair. "Your proposal, this Starfish concept. Explain it to me again." "Simply." Turner cleared his throat. "We can't hide our cities, sir. But we can give the Germans something else to bomb instead. Decoys. More than decoys. Complete replicas." Turner pulled out a sketch, crude but effective. It showed a field, perhaps 2 or 3 acres, dotted with carefully arranged fire baskets and lighting equipment. "We build fake industrial sites outside our real cities. We make them look exactly like the targets the Germans are searching for. The same patterns, the same glow, the same heat signatures. When their bombers approach, we light the decoys and keep the real cities dark." Joubert studied the sketch, his pipe forgotten between his fingers. "You're proposing we deliberately attract bombs to empty countryside." "I'm proposing we waste their bombs on empty countryside, sir. A Heinkel carries 4,000 pounds of ordnance. If we can trick them into dropping that on moorland instead of on factories, we've won. They fly home thinking they've accomplished their mission. They report successful hits. And meanwhile, our actual production facilities remain untouched." It was a simple idea, almost absurdly simple. But Joubert could see the genius in it, the way it turned the Luftwaffe's own tactics against them. The German bombers relied heavily on visual navigation, following rivers and railways to their targets, confirming their position by the distinctive glow of industrial fires. If those fires could be replicated elsewhere, how quickly could you have a prototype operational? Turner didn't hesitate. 6 weeks. Give me a team and the resources, and I'll have a Starfish site ready by the end of July. The approval came through 3 days later. Turner found himself with a budget, a staff of engineers and electricians, and a new title, Controller of Starfish Decoy Fires. It sounded absurd, like something from a child's adventure story. But the work was deadly serious. The first site was built near Bristol, in a valley 10 miles from the city's actual docks. Turner's team surveyed the terrain carefully, looking for locations that would be visible from the air but far enough from populated areas that stray bombs wouldn't cause casualties. They needed open moorland, farmland, or heath, places where high explosives could crater the earth without killing anyone. The equipment was ingeniously simple. Steel baskets, each about 6 feet across, were filled with coal, wood, and creosote-soaked rags. When ignited, they produced fierce flames that mimicked the glow of blast furnaces and burning buildings. Smaller incendiary devices created the appearance of scattered fires, the kind that resulted from incendiary bomb attacks. Flares could simulate searchlights or the flash of anti-aircraft guns. Everything was connected to a central control point, usually a small concrete bunker where a crew of 3 or 4 men could monitor the display and adjust the lighting as needed. The key was authenticity. Turner spent hours studying aerial photographs of genuine bomb damage, learning the patterns that fires created when they consumed warehouses and factories. He consulted with RAF reconnaissance pilots who'd flown over German cities after British raids, understanding what a bomber crew actually saw from 20,000 feet. The decoys had to be convincing not just in brightness, but in pattern and behavior. By September, there were 12 Starfish sites operational across England. By October 23, each one was positioned near a high-value target: Sheffield, Manchester, Birmingham, Portsmouth, Bristol. Each one was staffed by Home Guard volunteers and RAF ground crew, men too old for combat flying or too young for active service, but determined to contribute to the defense of Britain. The site, designated Starfish QF-12, was built specifically to protect Sheffield. It sat on Bradfield Moor, 17 miles west-southwest of the city, in a depression between 2 hills that made it invisible from the ground but perfectly visible from the air. The crew commander was Flight Sergeant Arthur Graves, a 50-year-old veteran of the First World War who walked with a pronounced limp from an old shrapnel wound. His team consisted of 2 corporals and 4 enlisted men, all of them local to Yorkshire, all of them with families in Sheffield. They'd been training for 3 months, practicing the lighting sequences until they could execute them blindfolded. The basket fires had to be lit in the right order. First the blast furnaces, then the factory buildings, then the scattered incendiaries that suggested a spreading fire. Timing was everything. Light them too early, and the German Pathfinder aircraft might spot the deception. Light them too late, and the main bomber force would already be over Sheffield itself. Tonight, December 12, 1940, would be their first real test. At 11:52 p.m., the telephone in the bunker rang. Graves snatched it up, pressing the receiver to his ear. QF-12, this is filter room. We have multiple bandits inbound from the east, bearing 270, altitude 20,000 plus. Estimated 18 to 20 aircraft. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill. Graves felt his mouth go dry. Understood. QF-12 standing by. He hung up and turned to his crew. 6 pairs of eyes stared back at him in the dim red light of the bunker. Right then, lads, Graves said, reaching for his coat. This is it. We're going to save Sheffield tonight. Let's show Jerry what happens when he tries to bomb Yorkshire. The wind on Bradfield Moor cut like a razor. Graves and his men moved quickly through the darkness, their boots crunching across frozen grass as they spread out to their assigned positions. Each man carried a torch with a red filter, invisible from the air but enough to see by on the ground. The fire baskets were arranged in a careful pattern across 3 acres, 12 large ones representing blast furnaces, 30 smaller ones simulating factory roofs and warehouses. Corporal Webb reached the first position and crouched beside the steel basket. Inside, the carefully layered combustibles waited. Coal at the bottom for heat, wood for flame, and creosote-soaked rags on top for thick, black smoke. His hand hovered over the igniter, a simple flare that would start the chain reaction. All positions ready, Webb's voice crackled through the field telephone. Graves stood in the bunker doorway, binoculars pressed to his face, scanning the eastern sky. The night was clear, too clear. He could see stars scattered across the velvet black, could hear the distant rumble that might have been thunder but wasn't. That was the sound of Junkers and Heinkels, somewhere out there in the darkness, loaded with death. The telephone rang again. QF-12. Bandits now 15 miles east of your position. Sheffield has maintained full blackout. You are authorized to illuminate. Repeat. You are authorized to illuminate. Graves took a breath. Light them up. Webb struck the first igniter. It hissed and spat, then caught. Flame raced across the creosote, and suddenly the basket erupted in a roaring column of fire. The heat hit Webb's face like a physical blow, forcing him back. One after another, the other positions lit their baskets. Within 90 seconds, the entire site was ablaze. From 20,000 feet, it would look exactly like Sheffield's industrial district taking a direct hit from incendiary bombs. Hoffman saw it first. A dull orange glow on the horizon, spreading and intensifying even as he watched. "Target sighted," he announced. "Bearing 265, approximately 10 kilometers. Vogel adjusted their heading slightly. Around them, the formation began to spread, each bomber selecting its approach vector. The orange glow grew brighter, resolving into distinct points of fire. Hoffman counted them. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of individual blazes. The pattern matched his briefing photographs almost perfectly. The concentrated cluster of the steelworks, the scattered fires of warehouse districts, even what appeared to be a major conflagration in the northeastern section. "Someone's already hit them," Richter said, his voice tinged with disappointment. "Look at those fires. Must have been a Pathfinder group." "All the better for us," Hoffman replied. "The fires will guide us straight in." He opened the bomb bay doors. Below, the weapons waited in their racks. 250-kilogram high-explosive bombs flanked by clusters of incendiaries. "Bombardier, prepare for target run." The aircraft steadied. Hoffman felt the familiar tension, that peculiar combination of fear and exhilaration that came with every bombing run. Any second now, the anti-aircraft fire would start. Any second, searchlights would lock onto them. But the seconds passed, and the sky remained dark. No flak, no searchlights, just those beautiful, bright fires growing larger in the windscreen. "Target locked," the bombardier called. "Steady, steady, bombs away." The Heinkel lurched upward as 4,000 pounds of weight dropped free. Hoffman banked hard to port, pulling away from the target as other bombers began their runs. He craned his neck to watch the impact. The first explosions bloomed across the moor, brilliant orange flashes that sent debris fountaining into the air. More followed, a cascading sequence of detonations that marched across the decoy site like footsteps of a giant. The fire baskets shattered under the impact, sending burning coal and wood spraying in all directions. The ground itself seemed to erupt, geysers of dirt and rock mixing with flame and smoke. In the bunker, Graves and his men were thrown to the floor as a bomb struck 50 meters away. The concussion was immense, a physical hammer that drove the air from their lungs. The lights went out. Dust and smoke poured through the ventilation slits. "Everyone alive?" Graves shouted into the darkness. Voices answered, shaken but functional. Above them, the bombardment continued. Bomb after bomb, 18 aircraft emptying their payloads onto empty moorland, while 17 miles to the east, Sheffield's factories continued their work in blessed darkness. Hoffman circled at a safe distance, watching the target burn. Through breaks in the smoke, he could see the devastation his formation had wrought, or so he believed. Entire sections of what he thought were factory buildings had been obliterated. Secondary explosions rippled through the site as his incendiaries found their marks. The concentrated inferno sent pillars of smoke thousands of feet into the air, visible even in the darkness. "Excellent work, Herr Oberleutnant," Vogel said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "The steelworks are finished." Behind them, the last bombers completed their runs. Hoffman watched Unteroffizier Krause's Heinkel drop its load directly into the center of the firestorm, the bombs disappearing into the maelstrom of flame and smoke. The entire operation had taken less than 12 minutes from the first bomb to the last. "Navigator, set course for home," Hoffman ordered. He reached for his mission log and began writing by the dim glow of his instruments. Target positively identified and successfully engaged. Multiple direct hits observed on primary objectives. Large fires burning across entire industrial complex. Assessment: severe damage to production facilities. The formation turned east, back toward the North Sea and occupied France. As the fires of Bradfield more faded behind them, Hoffman allowed himself a moment of pride. This had been a textbook operation, clean navigation, perfect target identification. complete payload delivery without a single aircraft lost. Kesselring would be pleased. What Hoffman didn't see, what he couldn't see from his altitude and distance, was the absolute absence of buildings in the burning landscape below. No factories, no warehouses, no steelworks, just scorched earth, shattered fire baskets, and craters in empty moorland. In Sheffield itself, Air Raid Warden Margaret Hollis stood on the roof of the town hall, watching the distant glow to the west. She'd seen the bombers pass overhead, dark shapes against the stars, their engines creating that distinctive unsynchronized throb that made her stomach clench with fear. She'd waited for the bombs to fall, for the whistling shriek that preceded devastation. But the bombers had kept going. Past the city center, past the industrial valley, toward something else entirely. "They've gone for Bradfield," said Harold Price, the senior warden, standing beside her. The Starfish site. Margaret had heard rumors about the decoy installations, though the details were classified. Watching those distant explosions light up the western sky, she understood. The Germans were bombing empty countryside while believing they were destroying Sheffield's heart. "How long until they realize?" she asked quietly. "With luck, not until their reconnaissance flights tomorrow. Maybe not even then." Price lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline slowly draining away. "Every bomb they drop out there is a bomb that doesn't fall on someone's home. I'd call that a good night's work." Below them, the city remained dark and silent. In the steel mills along the River Don, the night shift continued their work. The blast furnaces still burned, properly shielded now, invisible from above. The drop hammers still fell, forging armor plate. The crucibles still poured molten steel into molds. Sheffield's war production hadn't missed a beat. On Bradfield Moor, Graves emerged from the bunker as the last engine sounds faded to the east. The scene before him was apocalyptic. What had been carefully arranged fire baskets were now smoking craters. The largest bomb, probably a 500-kilogram high explosive, had struck less than 30 meters from their position, leaving a hole deep enough to swallow a bus. Smaller craters dotted the landscape like a lunar surface. But they were alive. All of them. And more importantly, the deception had worked. Corporal Webb approached, his face blackened with soot, grinning like a madman. "Reckon we convinced them, Sarge?" "I reckon we did, lad." Graves surveyed the destruction with something approaching satisfaction. "I reckon we bloody well did." The telephone in the bunker rang again. Graves picked it up. "QF-12, this is filter room. Bandits are departing the area, heading east. All clear will sound in Sheffield in 15 minutes. Well done. Preliminary estimate is that 100% of the enemy payload was expended on your position. 0 bombs fell on the primary target." Graves felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Understood. QF-12 crew all accounted for. No casualties. Site is... well, it's seen better days. You'll have it rebuilt by next week, Sergeant. Intelligence suggests they'll be back." The line went dead. Graves stood in the ruins of his decoy site, looking at the destruction that had saved a city. Around him, his men began the work of cataloging the damage, marking unexploded ordnance, and ensuring the area was safe. The fires were dying now, their fuel consumed by flame and high explosives. By morning, there would be nothing but scorched earth and craters, evidence of a battle that had never really happened. Dawn broke cold and gray over Yorkshire. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Lille, Hoffman submitted his mission report with confidence. The intelligence officer accepted it with a nod, adding it to the stack of debriefings from the other crews. 18 bombers, 18 consistent reports. Sheffield steelworks heavily damaged. Multiple direct hits confirmed. Massive fires observed. The report was transmitted to Berlin by noon. It joined other reports in a file marked "Successful Operations, December 1940. Analysts studying the documents noted with satisfaction that Britain's steel production capacity had been significantly degraded. The RAF would have fewer fighters. The British Army would have fewer tanks. The war would be shortened. They were wrong about all of it. 3 days later, An RAF reconnaissance Spitfire photographed Sheffield from 15,000 feet. The images showed the steelworks operating at full capacity. No visible damage, production uninterrupted. A separate sortie photographed Bradfield Moor, the cratered wasteland clearly visible, along with the scattered remains of fire baskets and control equipment. The analysts in RAF intelligence section compared the two sets of photographs and allowed themselves thin smiles. The Starfish program was working. Over the next 4 years, Britain would construct more than 200 Starfish sites across the country. They evolved in sophistication. Some incorporated actual building frameworks to cast convincing shadows. Others used electrical lighting systems synchronized to mimic the flash of exploding bombs. The Germans never fully caught on. Luftwaffe crews continued to report successful strikes on targets that didn't exist, wasting thousands of tons of ordnance on empty fields and moorland. Colonel Turner's theatrical background proved invaluable. He approached each site like a stage production, considering sightlines, lighting angles, and the psychology of the audience. In this case, bomber crews under stress, operating at night, desperate to identify their targets and complete their missions. The decoys played to those desperation, offering what the Germans wanted to see. Confirmation that they'd found their objective. The human cost of the deception was remarkably low. Across all Starfish sites throughout the war, fewer than 20 personnel were killed. Tragic losses, but insignificant compared to the tens of thousands of civilians who would have died if those bombs had fallen on actual cities. Flight Sergeant Graves and his crew at QF-12 survived the war. They rebuilt their site 7 times, each reconstruction an improvement on the last. By 1943, they could have a fully operational decoy burning within 20 minutes of receiving a warning. Sheffield's factories continued producing steel throughout the Blitz and beyond. The armor plate that covered British tanks at El Alamein came from those furnaces. The engine components that powered Spitfires over Normandy were forged in those works. Every ship launched, every gun manufactured, every shell fired. All of it depended on industrial capacity that the Luftwaffe thought they destroyed on a cold December night in 1940. After the war, the Starfish sites were quietly dismantled. The craters were filled in. The moorland returned to sheep and heather. Flight Sergeant Graves returned to his job as a council worker in Rotherham. Colonel Turner went back to the film industry, though he never spoke publicly about his wartime work. It remained classified until 1974. The Germans eventually learned about the deceptions, but by then it was too late. The Luftwaffe's night bombing campaign had been blunted not just by RAF fighters and anti-aircraft guns, but by the simple cunning of lighting fires in empty fields. It was a victory won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through understanding human perception and exploiting it ruthlessly. Today, if you know where to look on Bradfield Moor, you can still find the slight depressions where bomb craters once scarred the earth. Local historians have placed a small plaque near the site, commemorating the night that Graves and his crew saved Sheffield by convincing the Luftwaffe to bomb absolutely nothing. It remains one of the most successful deception operations in military history. The night an entire city was saved by teaching the enemy to see what wasn't there, and to believe they destroyed what they'd never touched at all.